Hi, I'm Jesse at Strobepro.com, and today I'm going to be showing you the Godox TT685 version 2 Speedlite. This is a very popular Speedlite and it replaces the previous version 1. We get a number of new features in here, an all new menu design, a new flash locking foot, a bunch of other stuff which we'll go over. Before we get into that, you might want to consider another popular Speedlite from Godox, which is the V860 version 3. Now that Speedlite has a lithium battery, which is going to give you longer battery life compared to this one, which uses AA's. Plus it'll recycle a little bit faster as well. And it's got the added bonus of an LED modeling lamp if you think that's something you might need. So whichever version you go with, both are great options. This one's going to save you a bit of money because we're not including a battery. You're just going to use your AA's with it. The other one has the lithium battery, and those are the main differences. Inside the box, you're just going to have two things. So we have our flash right here, and then our manual. But pay attention because inside the pouch here of the flash, if we pull this out, you have your flash foot. And it can easily get missed sometimes because it's tucked in a pocket back there. So just pay attention. If you want to use that flash foot, it does slide right into that pocket in the back. Now let's take a look at the physical features of the flash. So taking a look at the body of the Speedlite here, it's basically the same size as the previous version, but we have a couple notable differences. The first thing you're going to notice is the new layout of the buttons on the back here. This is completely redesigned. We have a new scroll wheel. Everything's designed. You have a higher contrast LCD screen there as well, which we'll go over in a minute. And another big new feature is the new locking mechanism. So if you've used Canon Speedlites in the past, you would recognize this similar type switch, which just has a button here, which you push, turns down, and then it locks. So gone are the days of the wheel where you have to turn down, try to get your finger in there and tighten it down. All of the versions, not just the Canon, so Nikon, Sony, Fuji, everything uses this same locking mechanism, which is really nice. Another really nice new benefit of this is that we have tilt that goes backwards now. So if you're the type of photographer that is walking around events trying to bounce off the ceiling or bounce off a wall behind you, this is really handy when it's on camera. Even if you have it externally on a stand, it's actually nice sometimes too, because you can quickly manipulate the direction. Previously, it would only tilt back like this. Just having that extra couple degrees of tilt there makes a big difference. But still, we can go flat down here. We can rotate basically all the way around, and really easy to do that. We still have our diffusion or wide angle lens, I should say, on the front, so that will flip down and you have a bounce card. You can use them individually, so I can go just the wide angle panel, or I can pull this out, just have the bounce and put the wide angle diffuser back in. So a couple of features there. On the outside, we have this little flap right here. So if you use your fingernail and pull that open, inside you're going to see the PC sync, which uses a 2.5mm cable. So if you need to use that, just remember the size there. And we have a USB port, and that's used for firmware updates. If you're not using that, just make sure that's nice and secure on the back. And then we also still have this in the front here, which is a battery cable port. So you can still use this with Godox battery packs if you happen to still have them. A better option that I would suggest these days, if you do want that extended battery life, then you probably want to check out the V860 version 3, which I happen to have right here. And if you look at these, there's only a couple real differences that you're going to notice. So on the front, you can see that this has this kind of white area. That's the LED for a modeling lamp. Typically on a Speedlite, you're probably not going to use it that much, but it is there. The bigger difference that you're going to find with the V860 right here is that it has a lithium battery, and that's included. So we can release that here. This battery slides out, and then you can see right through. Otherwise, physical characteristics are the same, but the main difference of this battery is that it's basically the equivalent of having 4 sets of rechargeable batteries in like the TT685 version 2 here. So if you're the kind of shooter that really needs that long life, and you'll also get faster recycling times because this is a lithium battery, then you could consider the V860 version 3. Otherwise, basically they're the same. Modeling lamp battery. If you don't need those extra features, which cost more, then stick with the TT685 version 2. I almost forgot to mention there is one other minor difference on the V860 version 3. For whatever reason, Godox put this hard TTL manual switch right on the side here. So you can see I can flip that up and down to change the mode from TTL to manual. Now there's a lot of different ways we can change that on the TT685 or even on this flash here. So we can just hit the mode to change it from manual to TTL, or if we're using a controller off camera, you would just hit the mode button on the controller. So really that's not a feature that I would say warrants picking one or the other. It's just a minor difference that you're going to see on the side here. Before we go any further, we need to install the batteries. And just a quick note about batteries, I really suggest that you go with a high quality battery. We sell Eneloop, which are made by Panasonic, and those are really the best batteries on the market, whether you go with the regular white ones here, or you can go with the Pro version. We also sell those, which are a black battery, which just have a little bit more milliamps in them. So you can use just regular alkalines if you want, but just be aware this is a powerful flash, so you can chew through regular alkaline batteries pretty quickly. Our battery door, really easy, so just slide that down and then it's going to flip open, and then we can just alternate our batteries up and down here. Flip those in, push it down, it's spring loaded here, so push down and then slide back up. That'll lock it into place, and now we can turn it on. Now we're ready to mount the Speedlite to the camera. I have a Canon camera because I have a Canon version Speedlite here. Before we do that, this new lock, we just need to pay attention to the position of where this little release switch is. So when you're installing it into the hot shoe, this needs to be on the left-hand side. Then as we turn it, it's going to lock into position. So if you see here, as I rotate that back and forth, what's basically happening is the hot shoe plate here is going up and down. So when we slide this dial, it's going to suck up against the metal on here and form our connection. So if you have it on the right-hand side, you could damage the pins. Make sure we're on the left. Then all we're doing, slide that in. So again, don't force it if you're having issues. Once it's in there, push the little release button, slide over, and you're going to hear a click. That'll click into place, and now it's locked. We're not going to have to worry about that falling off. From there, you can adjust it wherever you want. Like I said before, you can go front, you can turn it back, you can adjust it all around. So if you're an event shooter, this is a really nice Speedlite to be able to manipulate quickly and easily. Again, we have our bounce card and our wide angle diffuser that we can use there as well. One of the things about Speedlights when you're using them for portrait is that they can be quite harsh. There's a lot of light pushing right out of this Fresnel head, and it can be a little bit like a deer in the headlights kind of look. So if you're using this off camera, you might want to consider putting a modifier on it. You can do simple modifiers like this Godox light diffusion tent. Comes with a bracket, back that off, tighten it right down onto the head of the flash, and then you can manipulate that around just to soften that kind of harsh light that comes out of it. You know, if you're an event shooter and you're just walking around, maybe it's not a big deal, or you're trying to bounce that into the ceiling, but a lot of the times you are going to find that. Now what happens if you want to use much bigger modifiers? Say you have a big softbox or something. That's where something like this Godox S2 bracket comes into play. This will drop onto any light stand, and it will give you the ability to put any Bowens mount modifier on it. I've just grabbed a quick reflector here, but the same concept applies to a beauty dish, softbox, whatever has a Bowens mount, which is this 3-prong system. Just lines up to the bracket, give it a quarter turn, and it locks in. From there, we can just take the actual Speedlite, put it in the back, turn this down and clamp it, and now we've modified our Speedlite to use this reflector or the softbox or whatever it is. So just a couple points about modifying Speedlights. It's really easy to do and something you definitely want to consider. We're going to be demonstrating the Speedlite. This is a Canon version here. We have other versions available for Nikon, Sony, Fuji, whatever you want. And it really doesn't matter if you're using them off camera. On camera, there's a couple of minute differences. So if I turn on here with the power switch, you'll see because we're using a Canon, like it shows ETTL there. On a Nikon, it would show ITTL. But all of them have the majority of the same features. So if you are looking for something specific, you can download the actual manual if there's something brand specific to your camera. But in this case, we are just going to start off in TTL here. Obviously, off camera, I would have to connect the controller, but this would be demonstrating just as if it was connected to the camera here. So for TTL, obviously, our power does not change anything on TTL, because the camera and the flash are communicating with each other to set the best exposure and therefore power level of the Speedlite. So we do have some control, however, if I push this plus minus, and I should just mention that this wheel is a wheel, but it's also 4 different buttons along the outside. So I want to hit that plus minus, that's exposure compensation. So from there, if I didn't like what the camera and the flash decided was the exposure power level, then I could dial this up from 1 stop all the way up to 3 stops, or I could tone it down going all the way to -3 stops. So that's kind of the control that you have with TTL when you're letting the camera and the flash decide the power levels for you. Over here we have TCM. This is just a quick mode which enables us to decipher what the manual settings would be. So if I push this, and it would have to fire a shot, but basically it would convert our TTL setting into a manual power setting. So it would just give me a quick reference of where I could set those manual powers to, and then I could adjust them as necessary. So I could hit the plus minus and then just dial my power where I wanted. We'll turn that TCM, we'll go back here, back into TTL. We have another button here, which is sync. And if I push that sync button, you're going to see that little H that shows up. That's high speed sync. So all cameras have a native sync speed, which they work with Speedlights or flashes with. And most of those are 1/200th of a second or 1/250th of a second. There are some variances to that. But what happens if I dial up my sync speed past that, so say I go to 1/500th or something of a second, then I'm going to get some bars show up in the frame because I'm catching the shutter curtain. So that's where high speed sync comes in. We can enable that, and then we can dial all the way up to 1/8000th of a second, and that's really nice. Normally, if this is on camera, or even remote, most camera brands are going to auto set this mode here once you go over your native shutter speed. So if you see the little H pop up, that's what's going on there. Some brands you need to set it manually, which is why we have a dedicated button. Now, high-speed sync does come with one kind of drawback, and that is it uses more power. So if you don't need to be in it, keep high-speed sync disabled. If we push that sync button again, I already pushed it there, but we can turn it off, high-speed sync, and then we can go to rear curtain sync. So this works in conjunction with your camera if you want to fire the flash on the second curtain. This is really used a lot of the time if you're doing like night trails on cars, gives you long exposures and it's going to drag that shutter for you. So you can use it there, but make sure you turn that off if you are not using rear curtain sync. Our last button in TTL here is FEB, which stands for flash exposure bracketing. Now this is normally only done on camera or if you have a controller connected to the camera, so I won't be able to demonstrate it that well here. But what it enables you to do is take 3 separate shots with a determined value. So an F value, if I want to go +1 stop, it would give me our mid-range, which is at 0, it would go -1 and then +1. So it gives me 3 photos. And this is nice sometimes if you're doing like HDR or you're trying to composite images, it can be useful. Or if you're just not sure what the best exposure is, you can use this as well. So I would just push that FEB and then I can dial my exposure into there. So I can go from +3, it goes in 1/3 increments, all the way up to 3, and then I would hit that. You're going to see that it says 1. So as I click through my shots here, the next shot would be 2, and then 3, and then it's going to go back to 0. But because we're not on the camera or the controller yet, I'll just set that back to 0, and we can disable that. So if you ever see those numbers pop up there, you accidentally hit that, and you want to make sure you get out of it, because if you're not expecting it, it can be a bit of an issue later on for you. Let's take a look at our zoom, and that's indicated right up here beside that A, and then we have our millimeters. And zoom is controlled down here on the wheel. So if I actually push the up button right there, you can see that that is highlighted. From there, I can take my dial, and I can go right from 20 millimeters all the way up to 200 millimeters. Now you see that change to M, and that just means that we are in manual mode. So whatever we do now, that's locked. And what's happening is the diaphragm inside there is either opening or closing. So as I go further up, the diaphragm closes down, and it's designed to push that light as far as possible. If I'm shooting wide angle, I would go all the way back to 20 millimeters, and that's going to give me the widest spread. Now we can go even wider than that if we pop out our diffusion on the top. So I've just popped that panel, and you see that it goes to 14 millimeters. From there, you might be wondering why I can't change it from 14 millimeters. That's only because I have the wide angle panel popped out. So if I push it back down, you can see I haven't clicked it. So you need to hear that click, and then all of a sudden it's going to click into place, and now I can go back into zoom and I can change it to wherever I want. So one thing about this, if I dial back here, it's going to go to A, and if it's set on A, that just means automatic. If you have a zoom lens on there, it's going to match up with your camera, and as you zoom the lens, it will zoom the Speedlite as well. So it can try to stay in sync with that. Now, if you have a lens that goes, past the maximum, past 200, or on the wide angle, it's less than 20, then you aren't going to see it go any further than that. So it just becomes its useful range. Past 200, it really can't push any further than that, which is why there is that limitation. So there you have it. That's zoom. If you want to use it in manual or automatic mode, it's really easy. One last button we have over here is this little lock button. If you're worried about bumping a setting on here, you've set it exactly how you want it, you don't want that to change, hold that button, it's going to say locked. Now you can see I can't change anything on here. All those buttons are locked until I go back in, hold that for 2 seconds, and then it's going to enable it again. So just a good way, if you have other people using a flash, you don't want them to change anything, when they're setting it up, just lock it in place. So you can see this little symbol right here with the arrow, and I have the head of the flash pointing up. If I flip that down, you can see that that goes away and it's pointing forward. So if you don't happen to know if you have this pointed up, then there is a little symbol there. That's really just a visual indication for you. So we've done TTL. Let's take a look at another mode here. And again, on the bottom, push the wheel down, which is actually the button as well. And we go into manual. So now we are in full control of the flash, and we have to set the power. The camera is not telling it what to do anymore. So from here, it's a lot of the same functions, but we have our plus minus, so just hit the side there, and that's going to allow us to control this light. And you saw there that we can go all the way down to 1/256. This has a ton of range on the low end. So if you are using, really fast prime lenses, like you got a 1.4, 1.8, and you want to blur those backgrounds, this is a really nice way to be able to do that. So we go all the way up, and that's going to go to 1/1. And we can adjust this so it doesn't go in third stops or single stops there if you want it to go quicker. I'll show you that in a minute. So really easy. We still have our zoom up on the top that we can do. And to lock this into place, you can see I'm just leaving it right now. If I want to lock it quickly, I can just push the set button, or after 5 seconds, it's just going to lock it in automatically. So we still have our TCM here. That'll switch it over to TTL like we discussed before. We still have our sync, which is high-speed sync, rear curtain there as well. Normally we'll just leave that off. And then we get 2 extra buttons here. So these are optical triggering modes. We have S1 and S2. So if I push that, you see S1 pop up. What that means is that this flash is now looking for another flash to trigger it. It could be a pop-up speed light, it could be another strobe. Whatever it sees within line of sight, this is going to fire, and it's going to fire in sync with it. S2 is just a variation of that. So if I push that again, it will go to S2. It's going to trigger with the pre-flash. So if you had a camera that had red eye reduction, essentially it's going to ignore the first burst and then fire with the second one, keeping it in sync with that other flash. Moving on, now we're going to hit the mode button again, which is down here on the bottom of the wheel, and we switch into multi. Now, multi can be confusing if you've never used it before, so let me try to explain it real quick. This is not to be confused with continuous high and continuous low on your camera. A lot of people get that confused. They think, oh, if I set my flash to multi, I can burst it off and it will sync in with continuous high, for example. Multi is actually used to capture movement in one single frame. So like a dancer moving through a shot, or a tennis ball, or something moving across just in that one scene. It shows you the sequence of movement through that. So on the screen right now, you can see this example of a tape measure with continuous. Over on the right there, you see that we have the tape measure swinging through the frame there, but it's all captured in one frame on the right versus the left, which you just see one tape measure, not the multiple ones going through the frame. So hopefully that kind of explains it a little bit. And the way that we set that here is we go in and we have our times and our hertz. So times is just the number of flashes that we're going to fire. So if I hit the button, I can use the wheel again and say I want to go 10 shots, and our hertz. So let's just change that. And we can change this to 6 hertz, for example. Then when I hit the test button, it's going to fire off all those shots really quickly. And that's the way that multi works. Now, a little caveat about that is that the power level affects the number of times and the hertz that you can use. So we're at a low power here, which is 1128. If I adjust that power, watch the times and the hertz as I go up in power, it's going to start to change. So I went up to 1/8 power. The flash is telling me, hey, you can't fire that many times at that hertz level, so I'm going to adjust that for you. And so as I keep going up, you can see what happens. So this is best used on lower powers. On the lower power end, you can get a lot of shots out of there. If you want, fire it off, and it's just going to continually fire. This is also best used on dark backgrounds, so it helps with the flash freezing motion on that. So that's really all you have to know about multi-mode. Just control your times and your hertz on the bottom there and adjust your power level as necessary. Moving on from multi-mode, I'm going to hit the mode button on the bottom. We're back to TTL. Now that is not all of the features we have. We have all of our wireless modes. So if I go over to this button here on the right, looks like a sideways kind of Z there, and I push that, that's going to switch us over into TX or commander mode. What this allows us to do is control other flashes off camera from this speedlight. So that could be another strobe, another speedlight, basically anything that Godox has, which includes the wireless system in it, which is essentially all of their strobe and speedlights now. From here, what I can do is select the group that I want. So I could have a number of lights on different groups. But one thing to keep in mind right here is that Canon is controlled on group A here. So group A is this flash. So if I want this one to fire as well, like on camera if I'm using it that way, that's controlled by A, or if I don't want it to fire, I want to turn it off. On the other brands like Nikon and Sony, for example, that will be indicated by M. So M would represent the flash on your camera or the one that you're using to control the other lights. So I have my A, B, C, and D right across the bottom here. What I'm going to do is push that. It highlights A, and you can see that that dashed line means that it's off. The wheel's not doing anything here. I need to push it again. That's going to turn into TTL. And from TTL, just like we could do before in TTL, I can add exposure compensation, so +3, or I can go -3 as well. So that's the control you have in TTL. And normally you would keep that on 0 if you're not going to be using exposure compensation. Push the middle button, that will lock it in. But let's say I don't want to shoot TTL, I want to shoot manual, so I'm going to push this A button again over here on the left. Now I've gone into manual mode and I can adjust the power as necessary there. So the great thing is I can turn this one off. Let's say I don't want that to fire, but I have lights on my C and D group. So I can go over to C, hit it again on TTL, and let's go to manual, and then on D, I want to do the same thing, and we can adjust these groups however we want. So just keep in mind that if you put another light on a group, so say I put 2 speed lights on group C, they are going to adjust in unison on that group. If you want to break them out, they need to be on a separate group, but all need to be on the same channel. So hopefully that makes sense. So say if you had 2 background lights on C, for example, and you wanted to adjust them the same power, that's great. But if you had a speed light and a strobe, which are vastly different powers, you probably want to separate them on the groups, because even though you adjust them and they're showing half power, that power output is vastly different. So to control that, that's really all there is to it on the TX mode here. Before we get going with TX mode here, because this is wireless, we need to set our channels. So I would have already gone and set my channels on my lights to all be the same, the ones that we're going to control externally here. So right now you can see down here it says channel 21. If we want to change that, that's no problem. What I need to do is hit the menu button over here on the left, and I'll go over all these settings here in a minute, but what we are looking for is the channel right here. And so you can see it says channel 21. If I highlight that, I can adjust that to wherever I want. So we have 32 channels there. Another thing that you can do here, if you're wondering which is the best channel, we can go to the scan feature right above it, and this is actually a new feature. If I go here and click start, this is now looking for the best channel with the least amount of interference. So it's going to go through for like 15-20 seconds here looking for the best channel, and it's going to come up with a list of channel numbers that you could use. So you can see right here we have our list. It won't automatically set them, but you can just choose one from that list if you want to use that. One other thing I should mention about channel is that we need to be aware of ID. A lot of people will use ID. Essentially what it does is it gives you more than the 32 standard channels. So if I go in here, I can set this all the way up to 99, just using the dial there. But what a lot of people do is they forget, and they don't either set it on the light they're controlling, or they forget that it's on here, and it causes an issue. So I'd recommend likely not using this. It's very rare that you would actually need these IDs, because you have 32 channels plus this scan feature, so you shouldn't run into any trouble with it. But now that our channel is set, we can back out of here. So I can click the back button here. If I want, that will back me out, and now I'm in TX mode, ready to control these other lights. In TX mode, we actually have one more sub mode here. So if I hit the mode button, I can go over and I can access multi. Now you're not going to be able to set everything on these external flashes. They would all be set to the same setting. So you can see up there I have my hertz already set. If I hit the plus, I can control the power and push OK. I can set my times and then my hertz, but that's going to apply to all of our external flashes. So if I have group A, for example, I would go over to A, click it, I can turn it off or on, same with C or D, wherever I go. That's the only function I have in that multi-mode. So it pushes all of those multi-settings when you're in TX mode to your other flashes. So that's just another kind of sub-mode that you can use there. Probably won't use it a whole lot, but just wanted to point that out. Moving on to our next wireless mode. Again, we're going to hit this button over here on the right, and now that puts us in receiver mode. So you know you're in this mode when the screen changes color. Essentially, what happens here is we've told this Speedlite, okay, it's going to be controlled by another controller or another Speedlite, for example, if we were doing commander mode there. So really the only settings that you're going to have here is the ability to set the group, which we can see indicated by A, and we could also set the channel again if we needed to right down here. But for the group, I would just hit this button, it's going to switch. We can use the dial if we want from there, or you can just continually push it and it's going to cycle through the different groups. So we'll go back to A, and we are set on channel here. So before we were on 20, we'll just leave it on 20. I'm going to bring in our controller, and this is the Godox X Pro. So even though I'm using an X Pro, this will also work on the X2T and the X1. Basically, we're just going to set the channel. We have full videos on all of these controllers where we go fully in depth here. So we can see up here we're on channel 1, and I need to switch that because we're on channel 20 on the light. So if I hold down in the left hand corner here, that's going to highlight, and we can rotate all the way up to 20, 18, 19, 20, push the middle set button, and now we are set. Now if I highlight this group by pushing the A button here, we know we are on A on our Speedlite, so if I push the test fire button, then it's working. We have the beep turned on there, which we can disable. I'll show you that in the custom settings in a second. But basically from here, we can adjust the power as necessary, so rotate it wherever we want. We can change the mode as well. So from manual, that means off, so the dashed line. And then we can go TTL as well and use our exposure compensation as necessary. Now, I am actually using a Fuji controller here, even though I have a Canon Speedlite. So I just wanted to mention that if you are using these off camera, you can use any brand Speedlite as long as you have the proper brand controller. So for example, if I have a Fuji camera, I would use this Fuji controller, but I could use my Canon Speedlite or a mix of them if I had one Canon, one Nikon. And you wouldn't think that makes a big deal, but it's really nice because if you ever change brands, a lot of people upgrade to mirrorless or whatever, or change for whatever reason, you don't have to replace all of your Speedlights. All you would have to do is just pick up another controller. And one caveat to that is actually if you don't care about TTL or high-speed sync, this controller would work on the Canon. You would just lose those features. So just a quick note about that. Other things that you might want to keep in mind here if we go into the menu system here, just two quick things. We want to set our step. Right now we're on 1128, but we know that this flash goes down to 1256. So we could set it there, or we can go in 10th increments if we want the one down at the bottom there. The other thing I would also mention, if you're using this controller really close to the light, what I want to go over to is distance mode. And that just enables better communication if I'm very close to the other light, for example. So I can go to 0 to 30, which would not be the standard mode, back out, and that's just going to provide better communication when they're this close. If they're not this close, if you're a couple feet away, then you can just leave it in the standard mode. So really that's all there is to it. We can test fire it still, we're connected. And if you really screw something up, you could reset the controller by holding these two buttons on reset, or we can go over to the actual light itself, and you see RST right there. Hold those two buttons and it's going to default every setting back to original. So if you get stuck, that's a great way to start over. Let's turn off our wireless mode. We're going to switch. You'll see the screen turn back here. We're back on ETTL, exactly where we started. Now we have a couple of things to still go over, which are in our menu system. So if I push the menu button, I want to start up here. It says version 1.2. That's where you can check the latest firmware version. These Speedlights do get updated occasionally, so it's best to check, every 6 months to a year, or especially if you got a new camera, maybe there's a firmware update for it, and you can find those under our help desk on our website. So let's start right here on ID, and I already mentioned that before. That's just setting that channel. And the way that we rotate around these is we can just rotate the dial. That's going to go to the next one. I push the little set button and then use the dial. That will change whatever setting we are trying to do. So we'll leave that on off and we'll rotate over to the beep. So this is really nice. You heard before the flash firing. So when it fires, it beeps. If you find that annoying or you're at an event, a wedding, you probably don't want that on. So rotate it to off, hit the set button, and now it's not going to bother you when you recycle. Moving on from there, we have the light. Now, because we're filming this video, I have this backlight constantly on. Normally, you would have this set to 12 seconds. So what that means is after 12 seconds, this is going to dim down like that. So it would just dim off to save you battery, or you can turn it off completely if you don't want that on there. For us, we're going to leave that on just for the video. LCD here is kind of a useless setting, to be honest. It allows you to control the contrast of the screen. It doesn't make a massive difference, I find, but if you find the need to adjust that, you can just roll through there and set it wherever you want. We are going to leave that on 0 for right now. Here we have flash exposure bracketing auto cancel. Back when we were talking about auto bracketing, I told you that you had 3 shots. So you would expose, say, -1, 0, and then +1. And it takes those 3 shots and then it would stay locked in that mode. If we turn auto cancel, that would essentially get out of that mode once we were done those 3 shots. Otherwise, if we have it to off, it would just stay in there. So you probably want to leave that on. Next, we have the TX setting, and this is a Canon specific setting. Back when I was talking about our transmitter control mode, I said that group A is controlled by this flash here. So anything we put into group A was actually controlling this flash. Now by default, that's the way it's set. If you don't want this flash controlled by group A, we can go in here and we can turn this to the off position. That's the top position there. Now group A is just another group. It's not going to be controlling this actual commanding speed light. So the other brands are not going to have that. So if you have Canon, that is the setting for that. Next, we have the transmitter distance. And just like I showed you on the controller before, if you're in really close range, then you need to change that distance mode. And it just happens to be that essentially this is a controller as well. So even though it looks like a Speedlite, it has most of the function of the X Pro controller in here as well. So we can set that distance mode to 0 to 30 here if we are using something that, another light that's really close. By default, we'll just leave it here. And let me just scroll up here because we didn't start at the top. Here we have meters and feet, so you can go between metric or imperial if you want, and that'll show up on your distance scale in the front. Autofocus is next here. This is the autofocused assist beam, so we would need that on if we're going to project that lamp. So back in our custom function settings, we turned on AF assist, so you can either set it to on or off. And that's where this comes into play. The Speedlite is going to project a crosshatch red pattern when it's trying to hunt for focus. So if I cover the lens here and I try to focus, let me actually cover it there, you can see that popping on the back wall there trying to find focus. So if you're at an event and you don't want that kind of shining on someone, then you can disable that in the custom functions. But otherwise, it's really useful to try to find focus, and I would suggest leaving it on. Next, we have standby, and standby is for on camera. So if you want this to go to sleep, then you would keep it on. If you don't want it to fall asleep and save power, you can turn it to off. Very similar is the next setting, which is RX standby. That's as a receiver. So if you're at an event and you have this up high on a stand, you probably want to change this to 60 minutes, just so it's always ready. It's not going to fall asleep on you, but you do have a 30-minute option there as well. Moving on, we have our scan, which we already talked about. That's going to find the best channel. And then we have our actual channel setting here, and then our ID again. So those are all the custom functions as of right now on the Canon version. Different brands will have maybe one or two less or extra custom functions. And with every firmware update, those can change, the order can change, or new ones could be added or subtracted. So just keep your flash up to date on the Strobepro website under the help desk. So there you have it, guys. That's everything you need to know about the Godox TT685 version 2. Whether you use it on camera as an event shooter, or you want to take it off camera, we have the Godox wireless system built right in. So it will easily pair with the controller and any of your other speedlights, strobes, basically anything in the Godox line that flashes. So check out this version, the TT685 version 2, or if you need more life out of the battery, you could go with the V860 version 3. Either way you choose, they're going to be a great flash and it's going to last you a long time. So check out all the options at Strobepro, and until next time, I'm Jesse and enjoy creating.